What dark secret could drive a man to remain silent for nearly half a century? What horror could be so great that he would take his truth to the grave? Welcome to Sherlock Mode. The morning of September 8, 1863 began like any other on the rugged shores of Sandy Cove, Nova Scotia. The Bay of Fundy's waters lapped gently against the crescent-shaped beach as mist clung to the towering cliffs that enclosed this isolated stretch of Canadian coastline. 8-year-old George Colin Albright, known to locals as Collie, wandered along the shoreline that morning, perhaps searching for interesting shells or driftwood as children often do. The salty air filled his lungs as his small feet left imprints in the wet sand. But this ordinary morning was about to etch itself into Canadian history. As young Collie approached a large, solitary rock jutting from the sand, a landmark locals would later call Jerome Rock, he noticed something unusual. A dark figure was huddled against the stone, motionless. Drawing closer, the boy's curiosity turned to horror. It wasn't driftwood or sleeping seals he discovered. It was a man without legs. The stranger's legs had been amputated just above the knees, the stumps still bandaged and only partially healed. Beside him sat a jug of water and a tin of ship's biscuits. The man was soaking wet, shivering violently from exposure to the elements, his eyes reflecting a depth of suffering that transcended his physical condition. Terrified, young Collie ran to get help, but had difficulty making the adults believe his fantastic tale. Eventually, 2 local farmers accompanied him back to the shore. Their skepticism vanished instantly when they discovered the boy had been telling the truth. Robert Bishop and William Eldridge, the 2 men who verified Collie's discovery, later recalled that they had seen something unusual the previous day. A strange vessel hovering offshore, a ship unlike the local fishing boats they were accustomed to seeing in these waters. The vessel had lingered suspiciously, and then, under cover of darkness, had apparently dispatched a small boat to the shore. By morning, the ship had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only this mysterious human cargo. What the farmers found was deeply disturbing. The castaway was not merely abandoned. He appeared to be inching himself toward the incoming tide, using his hands to drag his mutilated body toward the water. It seemed he was attempting to end his life rather than face whatever fate awaited him on shore. The men intervened, carrying the stranger to safety. They brought him to the Albright home in the village of Digby Neck, where he was wrapped in warm blankets and given hot drinks to combat his hypothermia. As word spread of the bizarre discovery, curious locals gathered to see the mysterious castaway for themselves. The man appeared to be in his 20s or 30s, with a Mediterranean complexion. His hands were soft and uncalloused, not those of a laborer or sailor. His clothing, though not extravagant, was made of fine material, suggesting he was no ordinary seaman. Most striking of all was the nature of his injuries. Both legs had been amputated with surgical precision, the work of a skilled doctor, not the crude result of an accident or battlefield trauma. The wounds were clean, properly bandaged, and partially healed, indicating the procedure had been performed weeks, not days, before his discovery. When the villagers attempted to communicate with him, they encountered another layer to the mystery. The man would not, or could not, speak. Whether from trauma, fear, or some other cause, he remained stubbornly silent in the face of all questioning. Locals tried addressing him in English, French, Latin, Italian, and Spanish, but received no coherent response. The only sound he made was a dog-like growl when strangers approached too closely, a primal warning to keep their distance. Only once, when pressed repeatedly for his name, did he utter something that sounded like Jerome. The villagers seized upon this single utterance, and thus the mysterious castaway received the only identity he would ever publicly claim, Jerome of Sandy Cove. The Albright family, though compassionate, struggled to support another mouth to feed. Jerome was passed from house to house within the community as the burden of his care was shared. The predominantly Baptist residents of Digby Neck eventually decided, based on his appearance, that Jerome must be Catholic. This assumption led to his transfer across St. Mary's Bay to the French Acadian community of Medehan. There, the government of Nova Scotia voted to provide a special stipend of $2 per week for Jerome's support, a sum that would appear in provincial financial records for decades to come, listed simply as Jerome, $104. In Medehan, Jerome was placed in the home of Jean Nicola, a Corsican deserter who spoke several languages. The community hoped that Nicola's linguistic abilities might finally break through Jerome's silence and uncover his true identity. For 7 years, Jerome lived with the Nicola family. Though Jean never succeeded in getting him to speak, Jerome formed attachments to the women of the household, Jean's wife Gillette and his stepdaughter Madeline. With them, he showed a gentler side of his nature, though he remained mute. After Gillette's death in 1865, Jean Nicola eventually returned to Europe, leaving Jerome once again displaced. The Castaway was then transferred to the home of Didier and Elizabeth Comeau in the nearby village of St. Alphonse, where he would spend the remaining 42 years of his life. The Comeaus were not as compassionate as the Nicola family. Recognizing the potential profit in Jerome's mysterious condition, they began charging curious visitors a fee to see the legless man. Jerome became, in essence, a living exhibition, a human curiosity displayed for public entertainment. Throughout these years, Jerome developed a routine. He spent most days sitting on a rubber mat beside the wood stove, huddled close to the heat. In summer, he would bask in the sun outdoors. He never worked, wrote, or drew, showed no interest in books, and refused to look at photographs. Though he shunned adult company, Jerome displayed a curious affinity for children. He would watch the Comeau children grow up over the decades, seeming to find some comfort in their innocent presence. Perhaps they reminded him of a life, a family he had once known. Despite his generally silent demeanor, there were rare, unguarded moments when Jerome's vigilance slipped. Once, when suddenly asked where he came from, he muttered what sounded like Trieste, a seaport in northeastern Italy. On another occasion, when questioned about the ship that had brought him, he uttered something that sounded like Colombo. Most tellingly, Jerome would fly into violent rages lasting several days whenever he heard the words pirate or traitor spoken in English or Acadian French. These episodes suggested that his silence was not merely the result of a language barrier, but a deliberate choice, perhaps motivated by fear or trauma. As the years passed, numerous theories emerged about Jerome's origins and the circumstances that had led to his mutilation and abandonment. Some believed he was an Italian nobleman who had been punished for some transgression against his family or political enemies. Others suggested he was a naval officer who had attempted a mutiny and been punished by amputation. There were those who thought he might be the victim of pirates, or perhaps the heir to a fortune who had been eliminated by rivals seeking his inheritance. One particularly intriguing theory connected Jerome to the American Civil War, which was raging at the time of his discovery. Could he have been a spy or traitor whose punishment was this cruel mutilation and exile? But perhaps the most compelling explanation, and the one that many historians now consider most likely, is far less romantic than these dramatic scenarios. It involves a man known as Gamby, who was found in a logging camp in Chipman, New Brunswick around 1859. According to this account, Gamby, believed to be Italian, had fallen into a frozen lake and developed gangrene in his legs, necessitating amputation. The small community of Chipman cared for him for a time, but eventually decided they could no longer afford the expense. The town council allegedly paid $10 to a boat captain to take Gamby to Boston, from where he was supposed to be sent back to Italy. Instead, it seems the unscrupulous captain simply dumped his human cargo on the first convenient shore, Sandy Cove, and pocketed the money. If this theory is correct, Jerome's silence might have stemmed from a combination of language barriers, possible brain damage from his ordeal, and the trauma of betrayal by those who had promised to help him. In 1908, a man named Samuel Gidney of Mink Cove reported an encounter that seemed to confirm this theory. Years earlier, while on a boat that harbored at Little River, Maine, Gidney had met a man who claimed to be the one who had left the legless man on Sandy Cove shore. According to this confession, the man had been paid to transport Jerome from New Brunswick. The authorities there had hired him to take the legless pauper away to save town expenses. For $10, he had agreed to rid them of their burden, abandoning Jerome on the Nova Scotia shore. Judge Alfred Savary, a respected historical figure in the region, later corroborated this account. He emphasized that there was never any romantic mystery surrounding Jerome, just the callous abandonment of a disabled man by those who found his care too burdensome. Yet despite this seemingly mundane explanation, the legend of Jerome continued to grow. Visitors came from far and wide to see the silent, legless man. Some claim to recognize him as a long-lost relative or as a figure connected to various historical events. In 1870, a newspaper reported that a woman had traveled all the way from Alabama claiming Jerome was her husband. Others came from as far as Milan, Italy. None of these potential identifications ever led to a confirmed identity for the mysterious castaway. As the decades passed, Jerome aged in his silent world. His dark hair turned gray, then white. Lines etched themselves into his once youthful face. Through it all, he maintained his stubborn silence, refusing to reveal whatever secrets he carried. Children who had once played around him grew to adulthood and had children of their own. The world transformed around him. The horse and buggy gave way to automobiles, gas lamps to electric lights. Through it all, Jerome remained a man out of time, disconnected from the progress of the world around him. On April 15, 1912, the same day the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic, Jerome's long vigil of silence finally ended. After nearly half a century in exile, the mysterious castaway of Sandy Cove died, taking whatever secrets he harbored to his grave. He was buried in the Catholic cemetery in Medahan, his grave marked only with the single name by which the world had known him, Jerome. No family mourned him, no hometown claimed him. He remained in death as he had been in life, a man without a past. For decades, Jerome's grave remained unmarked, his story fading into local legend. Then, in August 2000, the Historical Society of Clare erected a proper stone marker in the Medahan Parish Cemetery, ensuring that the mystery man would not be entirely forgotten. The marker bears a plaque with the only known photograph of Jerome, an elderly man with a full white beard, his eyes revealing nothing of the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this shore. The inscription simply reads, Jerome. In the years since his death, Jerome's story has inspired numerous works of fiction, plays, and historical investigations. The tale of the silent castaway continues to captivate the imagination, a reminder of the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of even the most ordinary lives. But what is the truth behind Jerome's silence? Was he protecting himself from enemies who might still seek to harm him? Was he hiding a shameful past? Or was he simply a man so traumatized by betrayal and suffering that he retreated into a world of silence? Let us analyze what we know with certainty. Jerome was found on September 8, 1863, on the shore of Sandy Cove, Nova Scotia. His legs had been amputated by a skilled surgeon. He remained almost entirely silent for the remaining 49 years of his life, dying on April 15, 1912. The surgical nature of his amputation suggests medical necessity rather than punishment, supporting the theory that he was indeed Gambi, the Italian lumberjack whose legs had developed gangrene after falling through ice. His rare utterances, Jerome, Trieste, and Colombo, point to Italian origins. Trieste was a major port city in what was then the Austrian Empire, but had a predominantly Italian population. Colombo could have been the name of a ship, or perhaps a reference to his hometown. His violent reactions to the words pirate and traitor suggest a traumatic experience related to betrayal, consistent with being abandoned by those who had promised to help him return home. The confession reported by Samuel Gidney and corroborated by Judge Savary provides the most compelling explanation for how Jerome came to be on that beach, abandoned by unscrupulous sailors who had been paid to transport him elsewhere. Yet questions remain. If Jerome was indeed Gambi from the New Brunswick logging camp, why did he maintain his silence even after being treated with kindness? Why did he never attempt to communicate his identity or needs through writing or gestures? Perhaps the most likely explanation combines elements of several theories. Jerome may have been an Italian immigrant who suffered a terrible accident in the New Brunswick woods. The trauma of his amputation, followed by the betrayal of being abandoned rather than helped home, may have caused psychological damage beyond his physical injuries. His silence may have begun as a language barrier but evolved into a psychological defense mechanism, a retreat from a world that had shown him such cruelty. Over time, this silence became his identity, his only means of maintaining control over his circumstances. Or perhaps there was indeed something more sinister in his past, a secret so dangerous that even decades later, in a remote Canadian village, he feared the consequences of revealing his true identity. We may never know the full truth, Like so many historical mysteries, the story of Jerome of Sandy Cove exists in that tantalizing space between documented fact and imaginative speculation. The bare facts tell us what happened, but not why, leaving us to fill in the gaps with our own theories and interpretations. What we do know is that for nearly half a century, a man lived among the people of Nova Scotia in self-imposed silence. Whatever his reasons, whatever secrets he carried, Jerome chose to take them to his grave rather than share them with the world. In that silence lies the true mystery of Jerome, not just who he was or how he came to be on that beach, but what inner strength allowed him to maintain his silence through decades of questioning, curiosity, and sometimes exploitation. Perhaps, in the end, Jerome's silence was not a burden but a choice, his way of reclaiming agency in a life where so much had been taken from him. By refusing to satisfy the curiosity of those around him, he maintained the one thing that could not be taken away, his own story, told on his own terms, or not told at all. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, like and subscribe to Sherlock Mode.